Good evening, everybody. Welcome to episode 21, season 2 of Learn Live UAE. Today's the 22nd of February. Many of us have just had a half term last week. However, lots of educators across the region weren't fortunate enough to actually have a half term. So I take my hat off to you guys for keeping on going whilst you have the students with you. Tonight's episode is all about modelling in a hybrid approach. Those of you, before I introduce our two guests this evening, we have a little discussion about their experiences over the last 50 weeks, if not longer, in terms of online learning. We'll notice that my co-host is not here this evening. Mark is not very well this week. So first point of order from me is to just give a little shout out to Mr. Anderson, and I hope you get better soon. I look forward to seeing you back on the show next week. Anybody that's new, please do hit the subscribe button. I always forget, as does my co-host Mark, if it's down on that side or this side, but please do hit the subscribe so that you do not miss an episode. So tonight we're going to look then at modelling in a hybrid approach, and I think it's fair to say that educators across the globe, not just in this region, have done a fantastic job of adapting to what is only really referred to as the new normal. So I'm really keen to listen to how Lua and Matt have adapted their teaching to a hybrid approach. What's worked really well for them, what hasn't quite worked so well, because if we're honest and realistic, not everything always goes according to plan. And teaching is about being responsive to the needs of your learners in that particular moment. So I'm really keen to hear how our two guests have adapted. Thanks for tuning in. Mark, I hope you're well. It's great to see you watching from home, and I look forward to having a chat with you very soon, my good friend. Modelling is something that's been around for a very long time, and whilst our current situation has changed, the students in front of us still need that learning to be modelled to them. And something that's always stuck out to me, certainly in the last almost year now, was this report from the Education Endowment Foundation, their rapid evidence assessment on remote learning. And the first point, I think, is a massively important point, that the teaching quality is more important than how our lessons are actually delivered. And I think that's key really for all learners during that remote or hybrid phase. And it's, if we go on to look at other pieces of research or evidence that go on to support this, this, again, a report on digital technologies from the Education Endowment Foundation. Point number 2, technology can be used to improve the quality of explanations and modelling. I think the fact that, teachers have embraced, not by choice necessarily, technology over the last 50 weeks, if not longer, it helps teachers to work in new ways and provide opportunities to highlight their thinking, their schemas, and what they are doing to students to help the learning process. So I think that's key, certainly in the last year, if not longer. But if you go back a little bit further, this book here by Sean Allison and Andy Tharby, Making Every Lesson Count, they've talked about expert teaching requiring obviously challenge and explanation, but modelling as well being a cornerstone of effective teaching and learning, so that students can apply knowledge and skills deliberately to answer and evidence their knowledge. And I think that's massively important. We could go back even further again to Barrett Rosenshine's Principles of Instruction, which again highlights strategies that we all know and we all do every lesson, and that's provide models to students so that they can see our thinking out loud and help build those mental models for themselves. And to support and underpin all of those ideas, again, is this report from the Education Endowment Foundation on metacognition and self-regulated learning. And one of their summary of recommendations, if I just zoom in, is number 3, model your own thinking to help students develop their metacognitive and cognitive skills within the classroom. So there's lots and lots of content that's out there that supports the ideas behind tonight's show. But as we all know, research is fantastic and it's great to have access to that. But I think what's most important is the teacher in the classroom, because they are the people that know the students best. They have the best working relationships with those students, and they can make the decisions on the ground in the classroom for the benefit of the students there and then in the moment. So all of that aside, I'm really keen to welcome both Lua and Matt to the show. You can find Lua on Twitter. She's at @Miss_Lua_edu, and Matt is at @MClarkScience. So enough about me. Let's jump into our two guests. So I'm going to bring Lua and Matt straight into the show. Hello, Lua. Hi, Matt.
Hi, how are you?
Hi there.
Thank you very much, both of you, for agreeing to come on the show tonight and share a little bit of your experiences over the last kind of 50 weeks and counting. For those of our viewers that don't know you, Lua, could you just share a little bit about yourself, your journey in education so far, and your current context, please?
Sure. So I am originally from South Africa, and I've been a teacher for about 13 odd years now. Actually starting with upper elementary, grade 4 and 5 back in South Africa, but then moving down to the lower grades, and then ever since been in grade 2 or grade 3, coming here around, it was August 2015, and initially only for 2 years, but I'm still here, and it's year 6. So I said that they can kick me out if they don't want me here anymore. So this is my second home. My context, South Africa, I worked in a public school, which was actually my first language is actually Afrikaans, and so that is an Afrikaans primary school. And then coming here teaching English full time was also something that I had to adapt to. And then I worked with ADIC first for the first 4 years, being here in Abu Dhabi, in a small little town called Murfa in the Western region. So no big city or malls or movies or anything. We had a co-op for our grocery store. But it was a good experience. It was a really good school and well led by the leadership team, and I left on a very good point or stand with the SLT team there, and then wanted to expand my way of teaching, maybe search for a different type of curriculum, and I ended up at Westchester Academy, which is an American curriculum school, part of all our academies. I've been there for almost 2 years now, and we are inquiry based, so it's all student centered and student choice, and see where they go with our units of inquiry that we have. And yeah, that's where I am.
Thank you. You've got a really interesting and kind of educational experience there across different countries and different contexts. I'm really keen to kind of unpick some of those with you throughout the course of the show. Matt, thanks for joining us. Regular on the show. For anyone that doesn't know, please could you share a little bit about yourself, your journey so far, and your current context, please?
So Matt Clark, trained in the UK and taught there for 4 or 5 years before getting itchy feet and coming out to Oman, so not quite UAE, but Learn Live Oman, Learn Live Middle East, and I've been here for 5 or 6 years, I think. I mean, I grew up abroad. I grew up in Kenya as a kid, and that's where I grew up. I had my own student experience, so the idea of being in an international community was appealed to me, and still does, and I'm still here, similar to Lua. Kind of came out not with just kind of maybe a short-term plan, see what happens, and I'm still here, really enjoying it. I'm now the head of science at British School Muscat, and done that for a couple of years. It's obviously been a real challenging year this year, but then again, it kind of always is. It's always a job that keeps you on your toes, and there's always something to do, maybe more so now than ever. I'm just excited to hear what other people are doing as well, and share a bit as well.
Yeah, I think that's It's nice to hear you both say that. I came out here with the intention of 2, and I'm still here. Same for me. Came out for 2 in the middle of my second contract now. Don't plan on going anywhere anytime soon because why would you want to be here? It's amazing. I think that doesn't make sense. I think to add kind of a current layer of context before we delve into how everyone approaches kind of modelling, could we just share, I guess, our school's kind of digital ecosystem? So I work at the British International School of Abu Dhabi. We're a Microsoft Office school. We use Office 365. Primarily teachers from year 5 upwards use OneNote. Students in years below that use Seesaw as a kind of primary dialogue communication tool between teachers. Lua, what does your school use?
So we are also in the process of becoming a Microsoft Showcase school. So from grade 4 and up, it's bring your own device. Grade 4 and 5 actually only started that now, coming back to school. And so, like I said earlier, it was a process today, but yes, they have their own devices and they use Microsoft Teams. And I think secondary and high school, they actually started using Blackboard. I don't know if you guys are aware of Blackboard, and grade 4 and 5 are actually having their training for Blackboard now as well. But lower elementary, we also use Seesaw for most of our activities and assignments, but then we also use Microsoft Teams for our live lessons.
Yeah, that's really similar context to mine there. Matt, can you give us a little bit of insight into how you guys are running things over in BSM?
Yeah, so we're on the Google side of things, so similar premise essentially, but we're a Google school, and we started it just before, like maybe the year before lockdown and COVID and all of that, but no, we didn't really use it that much. And then we were very glad that we had it. And so suddenly everyone's got really good at Google using the classroom. So we have, if we're teaching online or if we're teaching hybrid, it's all through Google Meet within that ecosystem and Google Docs and everything. I'm using a Microsoft Surface personally. I still like Microsoft Office rather than Docs, but I'm sure I'll get used to it one day.
Yeah, I think it's quite hard sometimes to rip off the kind of safety plaster, isn't it, with certain tools? But ultimately, they all facilitate us doing fairly similar things in the classroom. Lua, if I could just sort of dive into you then, please, and a couple of questions then. What sort of challenges in terms of modelling for students have you and teachers in your school faced in the last kind of 50 weeks, year?
Yeah, it's a year. It's not just 50 weeks for me. We have, in the beginning, in term 1, most of our students were still online. And so we've only had a few students at school for in-class teaching, which made it a bit difficult for us to model it because it's all new for us, right? We weren't sure about how, but then we also just started into, we just came out of just online teaching. So it was all new things that we had to get our heads around. So we were actually able to free up, if you could call it free up, one of the grade 3. We are 4 grade 3 teachers in our school, and so we were able to free up one of the teachers, and they actually they were like a safeguarder in some of our hybrid lessons. So they would then take on the rest of the kids when the teacher introduced a new topic. They would maybe talk about it a little bit. We would have our Padlet to see if they understood previous knowledge from the previous lesson, but then also link it to the new work. And then the students or the teacher who was doing the hybrid lesson would then log off from the hybrid lesson, and she would teach the class at school, and then I would go and I would teach the students online. It just made more sense because we had so many kids at home. So, and then we actually worked in smaller groups. So instead of having one long hour lesson with our students, which would probably be 70 students, we would divide them into the 4 classes, students, and then have 20 minutes, 20 minutes, 20 minutes with each of those kids. And then just explaining the activity that they have to do on Seesaw by modeling how we do the first one. Okay, let's do it together. How do we do the first one? Grade 3 is really tiny still. And then we would let them do their work individually, and then told that we told them that they can still come in on the lesson, ask if they don't understand. But if they are confident to do their work, they can go off and do it individually and then post it on.
I've always been massive admirers, and a massive admirer of primary teachers. I don't know how you guys do it. I'm sure Matt and some viewers will back me up on this, but for me, I think secondary is really easy. I find that it must be really challenging for primary teachers, teaching so many different subjects within your particular curriculum. How then, kind of fast or rewind back a year ago, and then compare that to today, how has modelling particular concepts changed as a result of going from face-to-face to then hybrid for you, Lua?
So it's good for the students to see you. So it doesn't always help just to quickly upload a video that has to do with what they need to do. They need to see you model it. Or if you have a confident student in the classroom who knows how to do it, let them model it to their friends online. But they really need to see you do this, because the most important thing is the connection. If they're not connected to their teacher, they're not really going to give their best with the activity. They're just going to give the minimum. Whereas if they can see that the teacher is passionate about this and they really want to help them, they are focused, and then they will even try at home. Like I can use one of my, it was mostly online, but one of our inquiry lessons, which is our science and our social studies that we combine, for last term was, or for the first 6 weeks, was wacky weather. That was our unit. And then we were doing everything about the water cycle. And you can tell them as much as you like what the water cycle is and what each part does, but actually doing an experiment with them on how it works makes them think about it more, and then makes them remember it more. So we literally did our little science experiment with our water cycle in a bag. And I showed them, I had my little bag and I drew my little cycle on the bag, and then we poured in our water, and then we read the steps together. So really doing it with them and showing them that it's not just their work, but it's all of us together makes a big difference.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point that you raised there about not only relationships, but scaffolding it with them along the way. I know that Matt has read as well a recent book, Teaching in the Online Classroom, Doug Lemov, and those guys, the TLC guys, recognise that's of massive importance to the students, that not only you recognise it, you kind of work along with them and encourage them as they go. I think that's really key. Matt, can I just jump across to yourself now? What challenges have you faced? Because totally different context, secondary students comparative to primary, and Google rather than Microsoft, if you want to point that out.
Yeah, I think probably the first thing is just like everything has been a challenge for everyone. Like everything has had to change, and I think probably one of the biggest things as teachers, I'm not sure we're particularly good at accepting doing things second best, or not as good as we know that they could be. And I think the biggest challenge just in general for anything modeling or any kind of part of online or hybrid learning is that sometimes we're stuck and we can't do as good a job as we would normally do in the classroom. We're learning on the job as we go, whereas before we've had however many years of teaching, practicing the same thing, and then suddenly so I think for me that's been hard, because so in the last few years I've got quite excited, I guess, about developing my own kind of teaching, mainly through Twitter and people like Ollie that I've met online and things like that. And so we've kind of had a journey where we at PSC we went online, Saturday night we were told, oh, you're online forever tomorrow. So we quickly switched to that, and then we started having some of our year 11s and our year 13 students coming in, and then everyone else was at home or just coming in every other week, so we kept swapping. Then we changed again, so a few more year groups came in and some were totally online. Then more came in, and now we've got half of each year group coming in and out for year 7, 8 and 9. So every kind of 3 or 4 weeks it's a different system, and that's been a challenge. But I think whilst teachers obviously don't like or they're uncomfortable with doing a bad job, or like not a bad job but not as good as they would like, that means people have been really good at just figuring things out and sharing stuff. So not necessarily like a really dedicated program or anything, but just people have like kind of been forced to share, oh, we've just tried this, and literally that kind of informal grassroots PD between colleagues has flourished. And I think that's been great. And it's not specifically about modeling, but yeah.
Well, it kind of feeds into that as well. And I think that's something that I've always been massively proud of about the teaching profession is, you know, everyone is willing to share what they're doing to help their fellow human being out. And I think that's, you know, that resonates with a lot of people, not just educators, that we're all in it together and we want to do the best job that we can possibly do for the students in front of us, whether they're FS1 or year 13. In terms then, Matt, of kind of how was your modelling concept and how have you gone through that sort of change? I remember you shared a while back how you felt overloaded, like many of us did at the start. Kind of a year ago compared to now, how have you kind of adapted your modelling through a hybrid approach?
So I think what you're a while ago I shared this idea of when you're explaining something, kind of trying to reduce your own cognitive load by having really clear slide design, I guess, almost. And this idea of in the classroom, it's really important to focus your students' attention to what you're talking about and nothing else. And that's actually quite hard to do in a classroom where you have the ability to gesture and literally direct them to what you're talking about. And then suddenly online or hybrid, that becomes way more difficult because you don't. All you've got is maybe your voice and your head on the screen. You can't gesture quite so much, and you've got the students at home who I'm sure don't have their phones anywhere near them, but it's pretty likely they've got distractions everywhere, and you're trying to hold their distraction on a screen, which is most phones and laptops are designed to distract them by all these other good companies that get paid loads of money to do it. So it's a real tough challenge. So I think even more so, this idea of when I'm modeling something, and that's moving on from explanations, is doing everything really slowly, step by step, and having thought about it beforehand. So I'd like start with a completely blank screen. The beauty of being forced online and digital is that now I've got a tablet with a stylus and I can draw and annotate things. So if you start from scratch and then they follow along, as long as you thought about it beforehand, that's been really good. And I think that, again, you were saying, I don't know how primary school students do it, and primary school teachers, like students aren't digital natives. Like you look at their ability to use the Google ecosystem, and we think as teachers we're learning, well, so are they, and they don't know how to do it. So even just how to hand in an assignment, or how to submit a piece of work, or take a picture on their phone, in the context of their social media and whatever else, they're fine. But in the context of schoolwork, they need modeling just for the systems before you can get into modeling how to do some sort of physics practice equation or something. But like the idea of keeping everything as simple as possible, zero distractions, even more so than you would normally, has been really useful. And I think I'll carry that on even when I go back. Well, when I am back in the classroom a lot more now, but that's helped me. And the idea of, if you're going to develop and put time and energy into doing something that's going to help you with your hybrid or your online, you want to choose something that is also going to help you face to face, and kind of be more smart about what you do.
Yeah, it's been a really good learning journey, I think, for a lot of us over the last year, to really kind of strip back and refine what we do. in terms of the sort of processes of going through modeling a concept to student and making those resources, because I guess that's what they are within our ecosystem, work for us. Any advice then on, we're all in the same boat regardless of our ecosystem. We've got some students that might be in front of us in the classroom, some might be in an overflow room down the corridor, and some might be at home. So we're not just teaching a kind of one-dimensional class, we could be teaching 2 or 3 dimensions. So any advice from either of you on how to, what's worked well for you in that particular setting?
Well, PowerPoints are great, but they don't always work. So you can have the best PowerPoints with the nicest pictures, and you can sit for hours making them. And sometimes the kids don't even really see what is on them. So like Matt said, it's really important to start with like very simple, but make it as attractive as possible for them. And then I can share one example. We were online, but we had an expert come in for our wacky weather, a guy who does weather forecasts in the UAE. And though we were all online, all 4 grade 3 classes were in this one meeting with all their teachers. And then we had Mr. Howard who came in, and he explained without PowerPoint, without pictures really shown on, he just sat there and just spoke to them on their level. And then the kids were hanging on his lips, they were really into what he was saying. So you don't always have to be the teacher. Yes, you are the teacher you are the classroom teacher, and yes, most of the time you will be the one teaching, but you don't always have to be. It can be an interactive video that you all look at together and then you discuss it. It can be an expert coming in talking about, we talked about the weather, so 10 minutes, and then have a takeaway from there. And then just simple but attractive, should I say. Simple but attractive. And also, it's not always about what you have. It's really about how do you take this unit further. And so important to bring prior learning into things. If they don't know if they don't know what your previous topic was about, they're not going to link it to your new topic. So it's really important to have the prior learning there.
Yeah, I'm really pleased that you said that, Lua, because I think it comes back to something that kind of Matt said there. I think teachers inherently feel like we have to do everything ourselves. And there are so many amazing resources out there that we can draw on. And by reaching out to someone to help you open up the curriculum, I think that's, modeling good practice to your colleagues, as well as opening up the curriculum to the students, so that then you can really drive that enthusiasm from them around the particular concepts that you're learning. Something that I've certainly found, I won't say it has worked because I'm still in the process of doing that, but my team and I have been working a little bit at BISAD on oracy in the science department, and I know that there was a brilliant blog posted about teaching into the void, which is what it can feel like when you've got lots of students in different locations, not so much the students in the room in front of you, but if you're fully online, or the students down the hall that don't necessarily want to open up and talk and discuss. And through using the oracy 21 or voice 21, discussion roles, I've found that getting students to actually just talk with structured talk has been massively beneficial for me and my team, because it helps us not only unpick their learning and where misconceptions might be, but it just gets them engaged in the content. So that would be sort of my one little tip to anybody out there is try and use stuff that's already out there that can get the students not only engaged, but going back to that idea about relationships and collaborating with one another, because I think that's massively important. And we do feel quite often like we've just got to shoulder everything. as a teacher, and that's not always the most effective for students. Matt, if I can come to you next, then, well, anything to add to that, or you want to pick apart?
I just think, well, just like hybrid learning in particular, I think is probably the most difficult of them. So when we first started being 100% online, everyone didn't like that and was really excited about going back to school. But we got used to it and we developed ways of doing it. And then when we started doing hybrid, and I have to confess, I'm fortunate in that most of the classes I teach personally, either 100% online, because we have this thing called Flex Ed where we're teaching some school down in Salala as well. We're helping them out with their GCSE curriculum. So that's 100% online, and the other end of the country, or they're in front of me. But most of my team actually have classes where they've got 15 at home and 15 in front of them, and every week it swaps now. And that is the hardest, because it's hard to give attention both ways. In terms of really practical things, I mean, I'm clearly not the expert, but having that second screen, having a second monitor as a teacher is a game changer. We're fortunate now that we do have that, so that just gives you a real vision. You can have all the other students up there as long as you convince them to get their cameras on, which is sometimes a struggle. But so you've got them there, and whatever you're doing teaching here, and then and this is where it's just about developing a routine where you can kind of, if you're doing your questioning, then you're asking to the ones at home and you're asking to the ones there. And so everything that you're doing, you're trying to think of a way that it's equally applicable to those in front of you and those not. And if it isn't, then should you be doing it in this context? Because as long as you can explain something, question students, model it, and then let them practice, you probably need to strip those things down, I think. But again, it's real hard and it's never going to be as good. So it always comes back to that. And that's where I guess my role, because I'm a head of science, is to try and support my team as much as possible, but also let them know that it's okay not to feel like they're doing it, like, because they feel really bad, they're struggling and they feel bad that I didn't ask that kid a question, and did anyone even speak to them all day, and all of these things. And it's about just supporting each other and reminding each other it's okay, but now how can we get a little bit better at it? One of our teachers has gone, and they said it's also talking about, so we used to have lollipop sticks that they painted and put people's names on, and then it became tech because it was a random name generator, but it's the same principle. But she's gone back to doing that because it's a really nice visual thing where the kids at home can see the lollipop sticks in her thing and know that if their name comes out, they're going to be asked a question, and the kids in front of her as well. And she's found that really useful. So you probably already know the things that you can do. It's just what's the simplest way of doing it.
Sorry, can I just to that?
Yeah, sorry.
I was just also wanting to say that Maslow before Bloom, we really need to focus on those relationships, the kids' mental health. Sometimes you have this whole hybrid lesson plan and it ends up just being a chat about their pets. That happens often in a third grade class, okay? But it's necessary. I remember at the end of the 6 weeks before our midterm, the kids just wanted to see my animals in my house because they would hear it sometimes in our lessons, and then I would shift the lesson aside and we would talk about our animals because that's what they needed at that moment. You really need to know what your students need at that moment, and sometimes it's not a math lesson or a science lesson. Sometimes it's just talking about being kind to one another, or how can we reach out to people being in this pandemic. So yeah, it's not always about the Blooms, it's sometimes about the Maslow.
Yeah, I think that's really important, isn't it? That something that I said to my students this morning, the first time that I'd seen them this academic year, was you guys are a part of history. No one's ever done what you've done, so like, well done. I know that it hasn't been easy, but you guys are amazing. You've made it. We're back in the building. Let's concentrate on human first. And it didn't actually teach them anything. We just talked exactly like Ela, because I think that's exactly what they needed. They hadn't actually been in a room with their friends. for months and months on end. Maybe they had outside of school, I don't know, but to be in a classroom, you can't underestimate the power of just being in a room with all of those students. It's hugely important. We've had a question come in, so it would be remiss of me not to ask it, and it's from my excellent co-host. What are your thoughts about students modelling as a part of a revision or retrieval process? So I'll open that up to either of you.
I'm not sure I understand what he means by modelling, to be honest. Sorry, Mark. Like, can you give an example of what you mean?
So he's followed that up with, yes, that's why I asked what I did. Students taking their own work and making revision playlists, for example. So I saw something on Twitter today where a science teacher had given his highly able year 11 physics class 5 or 6 images and said, right, I want you guys to make me a 30-mark test with mark scheme that mirrors, or that you could use these images for. So it's students evidencing their learning via either models or creation of content in order to evidence to you and their peers their learning. So any thoughts on that? Good thing, bad thing?
I think I'm initially quite wary of that as an idea. I think because I think there's a place for it. So a very able group of year 11s who are now kind of moving from novice to more expert learners. If they're doing something that's revision, so they're really good at what they're doing, then I think the modeling and that sort of thing can be a really good idea. But I think for most students in most of secondary school, to be honest, it's unlikely that they have enough of a big picture to be able to do that sort of thing really well. And then the danger is that they get caught up in making the model and whatever it is, and the surface kind of features of their model, and they're not spending as much time thinking about the deeper actual like understanding of the concepts. So I think there's a place for it, and when you can get there, then it's brilliant and it's awesome. That's our end goal for our students. Is we want them to be at that level. But I think there's got to be a whole lot of scaffolding, structure, and modeling for quite a long time, probably more than you think as a teacher, until you start to slowly take that scaffolding away, and then you can do that. But I think probably, to be honest, more often than not, you're doing it too soon, and they aren't quite ready for it, and it's maybe not the best use of time. But that's my slightly cynical thoughts.
Lua, do you want to add anything to that? Are you in agreement with Mark?
I also believe that there is a time and a place for it. I think it's a little different in the elementary sector. It could be something simple like, I remember when in term 1, I was actually teaching one of the kids. We were actually exploring iMovie on our iPads, and the first group, some of the students were absent the one day, and so the kids who were in class, I went through them on the whole scaffolding process on how to make this iMovie for themselves, and they could do anything. I gave them free choice about what it could be about, but we went through the process of, you need to choose what you want to do. So just the 4 steps of what you need to do before you can actually make your movie. And so the next day, a few of the students were back in class with us that were absent the previous day. And I actually asked one of the students if they can remember those 4 steps. And they told me, first individually, they told me what the 4 steps are and how to work it. And then when I understood that this student knows exactly how to do this and how to explain it to the classroom, I asked the student to go to a group and say, okay, this is what you need to do. This is how we will work with this program. And then explain the 4 steps to them. And in the end, those students were able to make their own iMovie. So it really depends on what you are teaching. It doesn't have to be a 30-question retrieval practice. It could literally be 2 questions. And so we actually do use it a lot in elementary because that's how our students learn better. a simple thing on we would read a story, and then we would encourage the students to ask questions about the story to their friends. Like in our on our team's lessons, we would ask them to use in the chat as a question and answer feature. So if they feel that they have a good question about the passage that we're reading, they can pop it into the chat, and then whoever else feels that they are confident answering that question can also answer in the chat or raise their hand and then answer like that. So small little part.
Yeah.
To be fair, oh,
go on, Matt.
I was doing this actually today with my year 12 students. So we're at the end of a topic on electricity, and it's definitely not my work, but I stole it off a guy on Twitter who's, I'm just trying to find what his handle is on Twitter. There's an American physics teacher who makes these incredible like Google-born breakout rooms. Is it Joe Kazette? I knew it was Joe someone.
Yeah.
So massive shout out to that. It's awesome. So they were doing this breakout room where they have to work in teams of 3 or 4 and solve various physics problems about electricity to get out. But I've spent ages giving them open-ended problems, modeling my thought process about how I would approach a question and work it out. But today, I literally just got to sit there and almost just watch them, and it was the best feeling ever. Listen to them argue or help each other and go and talk each other through the physics, because that's where we want them to get to. But it was like, I guess inadvertently, it was at the end of a topic once they were kind of more expert, and then that's when they probably learned loads as well, because they started to work together. That's the level we want them to be at. But it takes lots of planning, hard work, and finding someone else's good resources on Twitter to get there.
I'd just add into that. Mark said to caveat all this, it's something that he used to do occasionally with Key Stage 4 or 5. But as you saw before, he said that scaffolding is key. So the teacher building up that knowledge is obviously hugely important before you get to this point, where once you've taught something and you're confident the students really have a good depth of knowledge around that, you can then ask them to create that artifact, whether it be digital or not. And I remember on a recent show, Mark shared some of one of his son's own work. He'd made a little video on Adobe Spark Video about the moon, and it was brilliant, absolutely brilliant piece of work. But I think what he was getting at, and some of my questions have been getting at, is giving students the opportunity to just demonstrate what they've been taught, and that's exactly what you guys have both given in your examples so far today, whether it be for either revision or something to drive agency amongst the students, like a digital escape room that's authentic, like creating their own water cycle, or just through oracy, just talking about subject matter. I personally think there's a place for all of that within the classroom once we get to the right kind of foundational point. So I'm on Mark's side on this one, probably no surprises there. But I think secretly both of you are as well, just a little bit. I'm mindful of time. We're at 1:45 now, and I've still got a couple of questions that I'd like to sort of discuss with you both. We've kind of navigated quite a few different things. Although the show was about modelling, I think we've looked at the importance of relationships within the classroom and collaboration and wider working groups, and how we might navigate students in front of you, as well as being away in different rooms or different buildings altogether. So I'd just like to, just scrolling through my mental thought processes here right now. What advice then, if you could give one or two pieces of advice in terms of teaching in a kind of hybrid context, apart from you don't feel like you have to do everything yourself, what would they be and why? And I'll open that up to either of you, deviating slightly here from the questions.
I think so. You need to figure out what context your students are working in. So for example, the students that I teach down in Salalah, the other end of Muscat, they're part of this FlexEd program that we're running, and they've all got a Chromebook as part of that, and therefore they all have a device that has a stylus. And that really opens things up. So if that's your context, I pick your one tool that you're going to use to model, and just pick one and persevere with it, because there's lots of different options. I use Whiteboard FI as a mini whiteboard tool, where you can see what they do kind of live, and you can push stuff to their whiteboards as well. It works really well, I think, as long as you have a stylus, you can draw. So I've been able to watch them or model how to like draw covalent bonding diagrams and ionic bonding diagrams, and then literally watch 12 of them do it live on my screen, and then I can pause them and go over it, and they can start to model to each other why that was a good one and why not. But that only works because they all have a device and a stylus, whereas some classes I teach don't. So you can't do that. And so I think you've got to start with what technology or device or do the students have. Pick one tool that you're going to then use that is appropriate, rather than just going and hearing that everyone's using this new thing and it's the new best thing. Is it appropriate for what your students have? It might not be. And so you've got to be quite discerning, I think.
I think that's a really important point, that we've talked about this before as well, haven't we, Matt? Get really good at one thing. Quite often you hear people sort of, whether it's a conference or wherever, just sort of say, oh, we're now doing this and it works really well, and they've not really been doing it for, not even a month. I'd like to think that many teachers out there now have been consistently using and making those marginal gains with one or two things over the last kind of 2 years that have actually had a real impact and influence on learning for the students. Lua, how about yourself? What one piece of advice would you give from a primary context?
So Matt's trying to steal my point. I do agree with Matt. Really know what your students are working with, and then from there plan your lessons, because I have students with a laptop, I have students with an iPad, and it really doesn't always work all that well together. But then another thing is, for little ones, they need routine, and it's really important to keep to that routine for them. We have many different platforms that we do use in our school, and they're not always effective, but the routine stays the same. So it's very important. We do a morning meeting in the morning, and then we share the schedule for the day, what they need to do on Seesaw, when their live lessons will be for the rest of the day, and then we sign off, and then we start with the rest of the school time. So it's really important to have that routine in the morning, like I said, especially for the little ones, because they need to know exactly what they have to do, step by step.
Yeah, and that, I guess that's part of your scaffolding model, isn't it? That it's that rhythmic routine through each day that's massively important to them. We're kind of 10 minutes out from finishing, and I've still got 2 or 3 questions, so we're gonna dive into them. What's your favourite EdTech tool and why? First question, we'll go to Lua.
So a lot of people use a lot of different things. I must say that one of the best buys was my iPad stand, because in online lessons you can't just use one screen, you need that second screen, like Matt also said earlier. And so I use my iPad to actually see who is raising their hand, who is typing a question in the chat, who is answering in the chat, and then I will present with my laptop. So it's not really EdTech, but it helps with the EdTech. So that's my favorite.
Facilitates the tech, and that's just as important.
Yeah.
On that note, let's give a little shout out to all of the IT departments across the land and globe, because without those guys, our jobs would be incredibly difficult. They certainly do help facilitate, support teachers everywhere. So big shout out to IT teams everywhere. Matt, how about yourself? Favorite EdTech tool and why?
I think a digital stylus, nothing more complicated than that, but it just gives you the ability to digitally ink on things, and I think that's a game changer, because you can make what you're doing look exactly what your students are doing, and you don't have to lose it. saved, and you can send and do with it what you will. And I think the more people that become comfortable with that, the better off I think we'll all be. And I think lots of us have been forced into that and then suddenly quite like it. So I think it's awesome.
Yeah, I'm going to share mine. Mine's OneNote, I think. Probably no surprise to many of you. I just think in terms of like a digital exercise book, I think it's so good for a whole variety of reasons. You know, you can share documents really easily with students on there. You can review student work really easily. You can review work faster. The time that it would take you to go through a stack of books and find the right page and then mark it, well, OneNote, it's, you know, 1 or 2 clicks, you're there. So you're saving on efficiency there. You can include voice notes within it, which I know you could do previously if you went and printed off some QR codes and then uploaded your audio to, you know, you're saving efficiency times there. You can include videos of other people or other work to share with your students. And then I just think that, you know, I could go on and on and on. You can use Translate within it for any EAL or ESL learners that you might have. So for me, Microsoft OneNote is my absolute favorite EdTech tool, and it would be remiss of me to not give OneNote a little bit of a shout out. I know it's thought of very highly in the education community, and there's a reason for that. But I won't jabber on about the awesomeness of OneNote too much longer. Yeah.
Some of us in Google schools and we have to do without it, but I still use it.
Well, Mark shared those times. I'd never heard of it until Mark shared it. Moat, what you want to get is your subscription for Moat, and then you can include audio feedback within.
Yeah, we used to use that for a while, and then you get a subscription. You can use it, and you can have a longer voice note, and then the time goes down a bit. But it's a real easy way of doing audio feedback.
I think it's a massively useful tool. That
Sorry, I have another one. Can I have another one?
Yeah, go for it. Why not?
We actually use Canva quite a bit. We use it for our digital portfolios for our students. So at the end of the term, with the report, we will have this digital portfolio. And it's all about the 21st century skills that we add in there. So they make their little videos and they share the work that they feel goes with the different things like a communicator or an innovator. And then we put them all on Canva. Canva is amazing. I use it a lot for many of my PowerPoints or just little notes that I share with the kids online as well. So yeah, that's my secret.
And in order to get to that point, you must have done a whole heap of modeling of not only how to use that as a tool, but also through learning journeys. So there's great evidence there of all of your work impacting on the students' work. I think that as you've said there, digital artifacts are really important for students in this day and age, certainly moving forwards. I think we could do a whole different show on those sorts of various tools. We're 5 minutes from finishing, Lou, Matt. So that brings me to my last question, which is what reading has influenced your thinking around kind of online learning, hybrid learning, and or influenced you as an educator?
Okay, I'll go. So I'm actually reading a book right now called Educated by Design, the guy is called the Tech Rabbi. I don't know if you guys have heard of him. He is really, really good. And he talks all about creativity in education, and that one of his quotes is, creativity is not it is a mindset. It's not a talent. So it's all about you developing your creativity in education. And he says every educator is a designer because we have to design lessons every day. And so yes, that's really influenced a lot of how I do my lessons, or how I look at things, and how I look at how kids can make it more like they can create more creative assignments or activities. And then also for the mental health or kindness side, I read the book The Boy, the Mole, the Fox and the Horse, which is actually just a book by Charlie Mackesy. And sometimes you just need those little quotes to get you through a rough day. And so I also share them with the students, and we have discussions about them. And yeah, so those two books are really an influence in my life right now.
I love that you share that with your students. So you're modelling positive behaviours there in what can, as we all know, be quite difficult circumstances when you're in a mixture of kind of online, not online, 1 minute, the next you might be hybrid. Reminds me a little bit there of a quote that's always stuck with me by Sir Ken Robinson. If you've never watched his TED talk on Our Schools Killing Creativity or something along those lines, it's brilliant. But the quote that I've always remembered is, imagination is the source of all human achievement. And I think that that's really important, because we've been really creative, imaginative over the last year, not only in terms of designing how we're going to share our knowledge with students, but also engaging students in the context that we find ourselves in. Matt, any learning reading that has sort of influenced you in your journey thus far?
A few things. I think in terms of just like specific stuff on hybrid teaching, the Doug Lemov TLAC blog is a real good place to go and look, because it's got videos of teachers in classrooms doing stuff and their kind of commentary on why what they're doing works. So that's really, I found that really helpful. But I kind of want to go back to what Lua was saying, and it really resonates with me in terms of actually it's about showing empathy and kindness to our students at a time when they need it more than ever. One of the books I read, it was a little while ago, it was called A Quiet Education by Jamie Thom, and it's talking about the introverts in our schools, and the school is actually quite an extrovert place by nature, and this idea that we need to give time and space for our students. And one of the nice things maybe about the online and the hybrid learning is that it's allowed other students to maybe be more vocal in the classroom through the chat or through something, because the format has changed. And we found when our students have come back to school, it's still taken a while. I had my year 10s, and for a few weeks, because I hadn't ever met them except for online as a class. I hadn't really taught many of them before. And they were all still sat there in their rows, and they still didn't talk to each other. And it's taken months now before now there's a bit of chatter between them. And so I think we need to, I guess, model how to be with other people, how to be kind, how to build relationships, how to look out for each other. And I think actually that trumps everything. I know I get kind of excited and bogged down in the technical how to model or explain something really physicsy or geeky, but actually that's maybe our primary purpose, isn't that? And more than ever now, we need to be looking out for our students as just kind of people and growing that.
Yeah, that's a lovely kind of point to go full circle on, really, isn't it? That we can't forget that, yes, we are there to share our knowledge, but that's not necessarily always a subject domain knowledge, isn't it? It's interactions on a kind of base level as fellow human beings, and modelling those behaviours with our colleagues and with those students as well. And I think that's massively important. Thank you both so much. I make it 1 minute to 9. I've thoroughly enjoyed our discussion tonight, Lua and Matt. Thank you so much for giving up your time to come and share your experiences and your thoughts. If anyone wants to find Lua and Matt, continue the conversation, or follow them on Twitter, you can see their Twitter handles next to their names. So please do follow them. They're always sharing great pearls of wisdom. And as a side note, Lua and I met through EdTech UAE. So that's teachers in the Middle East that are involved in all sorts of digital things in their school, meeting up to do exactly what we've done tonight, which is just share what's worked, what's working for them, and where they're going with kind of digital strategies and tools in their classroom. So do please get involved in that as well. But before I play the final little video, just a little shout out to you both again. Thank you so much for this evening. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I look forward to a little chat with you both once we go off air. So thank you again.
Thanks, Ali.